Okay. Welcome back. It's good to see everyone. Nice to be here. Um, I thought I'd just say a word. I've had three spiritual teachers in my life, and two of them are now dead. And my teacher Andrew Cohen died yesterday morning. Um, on the 39th anniversary of his awakening. He awakened in the presence of H.W.L. Punja, who was Maharshi's main student. And so Ramana taught Punja, and Andrew awoken with Punja, and Punja said, "Go out and teach." And I spent 12 years with Andrew in his community. And when the community fell, which was just a few miles from here, and when the community fell apart, we were very, very close for a number of years until eventually it became necessary sadly, to terminate that relationship. But I have a lot of love and appreciation and gratitude for him, and I think we're very lucky to meet such people. And Andrew's teaching was very unique in that it brought together all the world's traditions, and particularly process-oriented philosophy with an emphasis on uh, creative engagement with evolution and recognition that a fundamental nature of the self isn't just the ground of being, but is development. And that shows through all my work, particularly, I think it's always been present in my work. When I was a kid, I was involved with studying the higher order structure of DNA and publishing research on that and evolution of the nervous system and developmental neurobiology. So my interests always went in that regard. And Andrew really uniquely brought together all of the developmental philosophers, East and West, into a beautiful synthesis. And there were some real problems with patriarchy and dysfunctional hierarchies and power madness, but he had a very strong transmission. And so, to some degree, people who consider themselves seriously my students would be in that lineage, going back to Ramana and Ramana's teachers. And yesterday was the 39th anniversary of his awakening, and exactly 24 years since the day I met him. And quite a profound thing. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that and my gratitude and the influence that he had in bringing in helping me bring together so much from East and West, which I was doing before I met him, but he put us in touch with the world's leading thinkers who we routinely had by our center, again, just a few miles from here, that I was at 5 to 7 days a week for 12 years. And the leading scientists and philosophers in the world came by, and we got to sit in a room with them and talk to them on a regular basis. And it was quite influential to me and quite a rare opportunity to sit with such people. So I just want to express gratitude. So the we're doing the five elements tonight, and what I do when I make these audios is I turn the audio on and I just talk till I don't have anything left to say, which is why I think one of your audios was only like an hour and a half. And I was quite surprised with this one to get to the end and see it was like 3.5 hours or something, but there's a lot of information there. I don't exactly remember what I said because, of course, I made all these videos over the course of a year before we did this class. Anybody who's interested in going deeper into the five elements than that 3.5 hour lecture, I'm first weekend in April, I'm doing a 2 day class on the five elements. So the five elements essentially can be thought of as a lens that tints our view of the world. Everybody, of course, has all the elements and all the organs, and everyone is all of them. But the ideal of constitution is that everybody's cycle of the five elements is skewed predominantly more toward one than any other, and that becomes the dominant operant lens through which they see life. And if we can identify that constitution, the constitution becomes the thing that everything we treat is treated in relationship to. And the notion is more or less that between the moment of conception and first breath, that's the era of constitution in a person's life. Constitution is, Sun Tzu says, constitution is everything present in a person at the moment of their first breath. So that's what's called early heaven. And later heaven is first breath onward. Early heaven is what heaven puts in us as basis. And the character for Constitution Xing is a character for heart next to the character for birth, and it means the nature of the self from the moment of birth. And the essential notion really is that there is an elemental direction, an imprint, even on the single cell. And that we take our first breath and then we're put to the mother's breast, and we begin acquiring air and chi, but the air we breathe isn't just oxygen. And when we're put to the mother's breast and we take that first sip of milk, we're getting via hormones and through resonance her entire psychic, emotional state and stage and culture and culture. And culture is in the air we're breathing in that room and in the mother's milk. Her relationship to us is being transmitted to us. And the idea is the Constitution is a kind of filter that allows in only certain kind of content and screens out other kind of content. And colors are introjects, and we don't have a human mind at the moment of birth. The human mind, what we call the human mind, the reasoning capacity, the capacity to locate the self in time and space and begin making interpretations of one's experience in relationship to a seemingly apparently separate self, really occurs with the dawning of language. So the notion is that the five elemental tinge is that screen is present as we assimilate all early information unconsciously into the self. And it's a tint in the body. It's actually physical in terms of like protein conformation and resonances and structures. And we know this because we know that as the body develops, it has a constitutional type, right? We know that hands and faces and the body types tend to can be categorized into the five elements, but that's there in the single cell, and it's there physically in the single cell. And it's also there as a quality of resonance that we're looking through as we assimilate all early information. It's a tint on the eyes we're looking through that we can't see. And studying the five elements makes it explicit. So when we learn early on, when we're studying, oh, I'm a wood, oh, I'm a fire, oh, I'm an earth, oh, I'm a metal. And when we start learning about all the five elements, we can start to actually make the subject an object and eventually get to a point where we can see in real time how the associations of a given element are coloring our worldview. And to really know five element diagnosis, to really own it, is to have the capacity to watch a human being in real time construct themselves in front of you, for better or worse. You can see the process of ego constructing the self right in front of you according to the basic associations of the five elements. Um, I talked about I broke the five elements down in relationship to parts of the self and things like managers. And I think, I'm not sure if I said this because I don't watch the video before each of these classes we do, but we can very much understand managers not just as sort of psychic constructs within each element that allow in certain contents and screen out certain content. So, but we can also understand them according to the co-cycle. So we can understand how a person's kidney can manage intimacy by fear controlling intimacy across the co-cycle. We can understand how metal can control wood so that if wood begins to grow in a new way that's threatening to the protection of wounded and shut off and repressed dimensions of the self, that metal can get hypercritical to cut down those plans across the co-cycle. So that's something so we can understand managers very well in terms of co-cycle relationships. We can understand, for instance, with metal and wood, if wood is forgiveness, how pride in metal can prevent a person from forgiving another person because they're too proud. I'm sure we've all experienced in life times where we knew we needed to forgive somebody to restore a relationship, but we were too proud to do it. And of course, the sad thing is that the ego's point of view is I always have more time. And then sometimes we find out that actually we're never going to get a chance to forgive the person because the ego's pride just took too long. So there was a lot of content there, and I'm happy and looking forward to taking questions on it. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Lonnie. I'm sorry to hear about Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And
He
thanks for
was
sharing
a
about that.
absolute super complex, remarkably divided human being with unbelievable level of transmission.
Thank you. Sounds like a great loss.
Thank you.
Well, my question is, it actually relates to something you just said. It just kind of popped up when you said that a certain amount of content gets transferred with the first sip of mother's milk. If someone is not breastfed, how does that change the equation?
Oh, then
I'm
they're
just
just
curious.
not, yeah, they're just not getting it with mother's milk. I make the example of mother's milk to be poignant and because we'd like to think that, with mother's milk, that's purely nurturing, well, I mean, yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and that's not all that's coming in. What's coming in is the mother's entire conscious and unconscious psychic state and degree of development, and her entire state experience and stage of development, her belief systems, and especially her relationship to us. So it's just a lot more is coming in than what we might like to think about as just purely like a nurturing, benevolent aspect. And it's not a problem that it is. I mean, it has to. It's nothing the mother's doing wrong. It
Hmm.
just, but it has to. And I'm just making the point that the milk that's coming in physically is a gross dimension. We can weigh it, but there are subtle and very subtle dimensions that are being transmitted too. And if the child isn't breastfed, well, then that has its own consequences too. Because of course it's good to get that colostrum and to have that connection to the mother. So that's going to have all its own set of circumstances. But even absent that kind of physical nourishment, the child's still going to be ingesting through resonance the parents' and family's relationship to each other and their relationship to it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's what I figured, but I figured I'd ask anyways. I have
Mhm.
another question, but I'll wait
Sure. No,
till
you can
later.
just no, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, the other question was related to oh my God, and of course it's just gone out of my brain right now because I didn't write it down. Uh, oh yes, metal cutting woods plans
Yeah,
that threaten it.
yeah.
So is that coming from a person who's a metal constitution, or does it matter?
Well, it no, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's particularly potent when a person is metal or a person is wood, but it can work that way in anybody because of all kinds of interjects. So, just as an example, a person could be, let's just say, a fire constitutional type, but their self-worth was undermined by familial relationships or some life experience that was significant developmentally, so that they have low self-worth and that undermines their self-esteem and their capacity to grow. And then their metal limits their wood, and the wood doesn't make any fire, can't make enough fire, so then the fire is depressed.
Okay.
and
So it's
and
really
that
understanding the managers from the perspective of how the elements interact and
Yes,
the nuances there. That's fantastic.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hi, Annette.
Hi, can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear.
Oh, perfect. Okay, two things. First, a question. Okay, so listening to what you were talking about metal, and you talked about metal governing process, if I've got that right. And
No, I talked about metal governing wood
no,
across,
oh,
right
no, I
in.
don't mean I mean in the lecture, like the process of I think maturing from taking things personally to going into an impersonal. Would you call that? I think I on a
Yes,
slide
yes.
it said
Okay,
process.
sure. Well, metal has to do with transparency, and in metal, we so the organs of the lungs and the colon are membranes that determine what's inside of us and what's outside of us. When something is in your lung, it's not in you. It has to get across the into the blood through the lung, through the filter. And when something's in your colon, it's not in you. It's just in a tube passing through you. It's only in
Mm.
you when it gets absorbed into the bloodstream. So the lungs and the colon literally are the organs of taking things personally. And when we take things personally, we have pride. Aren't I brilliant? Aren't I talented? Aren't I smart? Aren't I good looking? I, me, and mine, taking things personally. And the gift of metal, of course, is through renunciation and letting go of attachment to thoughts and feelings and emotions, sitting in meditation, for instance, focusing on the breath and then letting go of everything, even letting go of the breath. When we let go of everything, attachment to everything, we start to see that we begin to actually take life less and less personally. So, meditation is a fabulous practice for people who are easily triggered. Why? Because it engenders less and less and less and less attachment to feeling and thought states, specific thoughts and feeling states and emotions and sensations, So there's distance between oneself and one's experience, and then one will be less triggered because one just tends to take things less personally.
So when you talked about metal governing process, it was that process specifically, meditation and the very process of lightening up like that. Is that what, because it said process on the slide, I believe.
Well, it's okay. The process perspective, the process perspective is just realizing that our experience is part of a process and isn't purely personal, that
Oh,
we exist in a huge context, not and as part of a process, not in isolation.
oh, I didn't understand. Oh, that makes sense.
Not as isolation. The lungs and the colon create this illusion of a separate self, which is the basis of pride. And when we can see through that self, all of a sudden we realize that that my thoughts, my feelings, my emotion. Okay, when we talk about in the 60s and 70s in what I call New Age healing, which was a beautiful evolution in healing, and we're all part of that substantially, there was a huge notion of my thoughts, my feelings, my emotion. And in metal, all of a sudden we can have this revelation, which is I'm experiencing them, but what makes them mine?
Ah,
What
ah,
make the fact that you have a thought, what makes it your thought?
ah.
No thought occurs in isolation. Nothing, no one, nothing is produced out of a vacuum.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. I got it wrong.
I mean, so for instance, like if I was prideful, I could say, Nourishing Destiny is my book. Okay, but there are like 500 bibliographic references, like 1,200 footnotes. I mean, it, it,
Well,
it doesn't belong to me. And I've had this insight profoundly, and I have no doubt about it, but I had a very, very beautiful and strong experience of it, yes, of yesterday morning or the morning before when I was sort of half in and half out of sleeping. And I just had this strong experience, none of us are separate.
hmm.
The ego through metal, through pride, creates this illusion of my life and my experience and the archaeology of myself and my issues and my pain and my trauma and I, me, mine, and all of this. And if you push into it in an impersonal way, I mean, there is no me separate from the people I've interacted with and known and loved. I had this experience. I had dreamed of my grandparents, and I woke up and realized I'm not separate from my entire ancestry, from my entire lineage, from my culture, or from anyone.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, beautiful. Oh,
So metal can empower that through breath and through letting go.
okay. Thank you. That's great. And I just wanted to tell you, because I think you'll find this interesting, as
Mhm,
bringing the psychology angle in.
mhm,
Alfred Adler was one of the fathers of modern psychology. He
mhm,
came up with a technique where he would ask people to tell him their 10 earliest memories.
mhm,
And so I've been using the technique for decades. And you get someone's 10 earliest memories, you've got the dominant element. Of course, you can see it on the face, but you can see it in the 10 memories. Also, my background, I did a doctoral dissertation on the use of the psychology of handwriting. If
mhm.
you train in handwriting, you can see the elements. So just from a psychological point of view, I thought you'd enjoy that to
Well,
know.
the elements are present. You can differentiate every functional dynamic that exists with the elements,
Yep.
and they're present in every differentiated thing in the planet.
Which
And
is why, oh, sorry. Yep.
no, yeah.
Which is why I think that this should be full of psychotherapists at your seminar, that they don't know it and they need to know it, that such a brilliant frame. So agreed.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've gotten a tremendous amount out of the study of psychology and psychoanalysis that I've done. And I would think that any psychoanalyst would just drink in Five Element and Chinese medicine in general very deeply, because they're both functional models. I mean, I can put a stick on the table, but I can't show you wood. I mean, a stick is wood, but that's not wood is perspective, and the whole subtle dimension of it. And nobody can stick an id or an ego on a table and weigh it or give me a dimension of it. They're both functional sciences.
Yeah.
And of course, Jung and Neumann and people in that school were profoundly influenced by the I Ching and Vedanta and Taoism and Buddhism. D.T. Suzuki's student took William James' text on pragmatism to his teacher in Japan and told him it was one of the greatest Buddhist texts ever written. So, I mean, there's just a lot of overlap.
Yes.
I mentioned James because he wrote the first textbook in the West on psychology.
Lovely.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, Cliff, hi.
Hi, Lonnie, and thanks again for the marathon lecture.
Yes, sir.
I think there's more insights per cubic meter of airspace than anywhere else on the planet. It's enormous. I think you partially dealt with this in response to the next question, but in the lecture you do emphasize the importance of seeing the difference between engaging this shadow work from an absolute perspective as
Yes.
opposed to a psychological humanistic perspective. There is so much in that. I just wondered if you could just speak to that a little.
Yes, there's a chapter in my green book called The Path of Medicine, do you have the green book?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that goes very deeply into it for anyone who wants to follow up beyond what I'll say here, but we basically all come from pluralism. Most of us come from pluralism. We have a pluralistic basis. Most of our worldview is rooted in postmodernism of the 1960s. Most of us came of age then or later. And that in the leading edge of culture in the West is the dominant operant, really, force on average. About 30% of the West is at a postmodern stage of development. So this is the capacity to hold many perspectives simultaneously. I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. I can read all of the texts and appreciate their opinion. If I'm in an organization, I want to sit in a circle and hear what everyone has to say. Like in a Quaker meeting, we're going to go around and anyone can speak and voice an opinion. And then we're going to come up a solution that honors everyone so everyone feels heard and everyone's included. And the civil rights movement came from this, and it's very beautiful. You have your truth, I have my truth, nobody knows the truth. The flourishing of multi-perspectivity and pluralism eliminated hierarchy, because all of the hierarchies that existed on the planet were patriarchal dominant hierarchies based on economic class, nation of birth, skin color, or religion. They were all artificial dominator hierarchies. And postmodernism, the capacity to hold multiple perspectives, teaches us through the work of Derrida and Edward Said and Michel Foucault, for instance, that all these hierarchies are built on power and that all cultural agreements have in them power dynamics. And Michel Foucault said that power is knowledge. He reversed knowledge is power. Power is knowledge. And Trump knows this, for instance. This is why they're burning books and erasing all the information about Jackie Robinson and from the army sites. And they're trying to limit information because the ruling class, those in power, get to decide what's real and what isn't. They get to decide what the truth is and what isn't. And what that does is, while the great strength of pluralism and postmodernism is the capacity to hold multiple points of view, it eliminated the king, the church, dysfunctional power hierarchies, and deconstructed all truths so that what it eventually comes down to, the limiting aspect of postmodernism and pluralism, as beautiful as they are, is that every perspective is considered equal because every perspective is a perspective. And all perspectives are equal. They're just perspectives. And from that perspective, culture became very used to looking at the one through the eyes of the many. So I'm going to read Lao Tzu, and I'm going to read Buddhism, and I'm going to read Ramana Maharshi, and I'm going to read the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I'm going to read the Quran, and I can read all of that. And through the many perspectives, I can look at the one. And isn't this interesting what they all have to say about the one? But what does it mean to look at what? So we all know what the perspective of the many is on the one, which is it's everybody's opinion. And everybody has their point of view. So what's interesting is to shift and ask, what does it mean to look through the eyes of the one on the many? Because we're used to looking through the eyes of the many on the one, every position is relative, and we have medicine and psychotherapy and all sorts of therapies where we try to work through the trauma in the relative dimension of the self from the perspective of the relative dimension of the self, which is always wounded and traumatized. And that's what gave birth to the idea of the wounded inner child and the idea of birth trauma. I mean, sure, a lot's coming in with your mother's milk. Sure, but you're not a victim of that. To become an adult, my definition of an adult is that you take responsibility for your condition and you stop being a victim. An adult is somebody who's responsible for who and what they are in the world. And at the moment a person becomes an adult, they shift from having history be the most significant factor in determining who they are in every moment to the future that they're endeavoring to create becomes the most significant factor. And the most significant context for interpreting experience is no longer that of a victim being acted on by forces they're unaware of or don't understand. The context for interpreting experience comes from an obligation to the whole and a creative awakened relationship where one has ceased to take it personally and has recognized the deep commitment they made in incarnating, that the most profound medicine they would experience in their life would be to engage enthusiastically and creatively with what is. And what is always what is, and therefore never a problem, and always an opportunity to manifest this recognition. And so the problem with psychotherapy in general is it goes back to when you were born and your birth experience. That would be like Wilhelm Reich and Stanislaw Grof, who are great geniuses. But you go back and look, you had all this experience in the birth canal, and look what that did to you. And then look what came in with the mother's milk. And then look what happened when you were young. And then and then tell me about the first time this happened. And it starts, tell me when your trauma was. And it goes all the way back, and it begins working forward and working forward and working forward and working forward through the biographical self, reinforcing that all of that stuff was personal. It happened to you, and it formulated you, and you are the outcome of these experiences. And that has strengths and weaknesses, and the weakness is that kind of therapy reinforces identification with the wound. My precious, that I'm going to be working on the rest of my life. And what I'm simply advocating for in the tradition that I come from, because because this is a dharmic medicine, is the recognition that despite the importance of understanding all of those dynamics, and no one can accuse me of underestimating them, because we're 9 months into a course, 8 or 9 months into a very detailed course where we paid a lot of attention to all those dynamics. But because this is a dharmic medicine, what I really have found to be more effective is for a person to awaken to the dimension of themselves that was never wounded, isn't traumatized, is empty of content, and the explosion coming out of it, which is an expression of the creative impulse that's driving the entire universe forward. And that is the life force within us, and to awaken to that force within the self of pure interest in what is, and to recognize I am the vehicle through which God and heaven get to express the highest will of creation in the world through love, care, and kindness and creativity, and responding to what is in a way that moves everything forward toward the true, toward the good, toward the beautiful, and to be able to step into the dimension of the self which is unwounded, and from that center of the circle be able to then engage with all the complexity out in the circle. The problem with therapy and most humanist psychologies and all of it is that people are engaging with the content of the circle within the circle and not from the perspective of the self. Now, if you read the internal family systems therapy, they give a little bit of lip service to the importance of the practitioner holding the perspective of the self, capital S, in sessions, and doing whatever one can to pull the patient into that perspective of the self, so that they can look at all the complexity and all the parts of the self from the perspective of the unconditionally loving witness. And one of the main things I learned from my teacher, Andrew, and that community, in spite of him in that community, is that love is the only meaningful context in which healthy human development occurs. And love is consciousness. Consciousness is love. And so what I'm advocating for is, rather than swimming through all the complexity and dealing with it from the perspective of complexity, being able to, that it's much more effective to be able to look at complexity from the perspective of simplicity. And that simplicity is simply the recognition that right here, right now, with everything as it is, and my whole life as it is, and my experience as it is, and my ancestors' experience as it were, and my parents' experience as they were, and with all my emotions, thoughts, feelings, with the mind and the body I have right here and right now, I am whole. There's nothing in the way. There's no excuses. I'm ready to go. I'd say that's the essential.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you. Hi, Grandma.
Hi. After listening to you, I almost forgot my question, but I will do it. You said something about one is too proud to forgive,
Yes.
and one may not have enough time to forgive.
Well, because the other
But if
person
one is not too proud, but one is too angry for something that was done to a person, not proud, but angry.
I think if you dig a little deeper,
Yeah,
that there's pride behind the anger.
you really feel that.
I suspect.
I mean, of course, you're the
Well,
teacher.
well,
I'm just.
Well, look, it's not unhealthy to be angry
I know.
when a person has shown
Advantage.
terrible disregard or taken completely advantage of one.
Right.
But the question is, what is the motive? The question is, what is the fundamental motive here? And if the fundamental motive is to be free, for you to be free,
Of that person.
and beyond the selfish motive of just wanting my own freedom so that I feel better and I'm healthier, if I've fundamentally come to the recognition that I'm not a victim and I incarnated by choice, for the sake of everything and everyone else, and my life ultimately isn't for me, my life is ultimately an expression of the divine, and I am a vehicle for the awakening of everything and everyone else, then I can understand that the harm the other person caused me was exactly proportional to the degree of their own imprisonment of their soul and their own suffering. And if I've truly seen through my own ego and my own self as a construct, I know the part of me that suffered and the part of me that suffers, as real as it may be and as compelling as it may be, is nowhere nearly as real or compelling as the force of light and love and care, bodhisattva care, that I've awoken to. Then my main motive won't be anymore for me to feel better or to be right about anything, but it will be expressed as a care for the whole, which will involve the forgiveness of the other. Now, having said that, and to elaborate it a little more, the ego's position is always limited to a specific incarnation and always sees itself as a victim of what's happened to it in that incarnation. And what it doesn't see is the soul's perspective, because we have to wake up to the soul beyond ego in order to really become not merely egos, but souls, and hopefully becoming more soul than ego. And the soul's perspective is over vast expanses of time. And in the soul incarnated to be this vehicle of care and of wholeness. And in the soul's perspective, the soul knows that even in this lifetime, we've caused other people unnecessary pain through our own selfishness and ignorance, that we've been the abuser.
You mean that is the recipient of the insult or the hurt? You're saying that the one who is too angry or too proud
Has
is
has abused
also one
has
that's the need
abused
to change?
has abused other people. Has caused,
Me?
you know, any
Me?
human being. Have you never been the source of anybody else's unnecessary suffering?
No.
It's not what
No.
I heard.
No, only when no, I won't even say it.
Only when she wants, tries to sit still and be
Meditative
quiet for 5 minutes.
2 hours. That's beyond my ken.
Anyway, to continue here without getting personal,
Yeah,
it is my experience that every human being has played all roles,
I know.
and that at some point in their life, for most of us, unfortunately, in the last moments, we are going to want to be forgiven. And the only thing that can set us up to be at peace is to already have forgiven everything and everyone, ourselves. And why wait? Why not do it now? Why not do it now? And I would suggest the reason we're not doing it now is not just because we're angry. The anger is a smokescreen. Behind it is pride. I'm not letting go of this. It's my precious. The anger is my precious. And you're going to have to pry it from my cold, dead hands.
Well, we agree to disagree.
Okay.
Oh, Lonnie, I have a question if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure if I'm really grasping the connection between the water element and power, which is a bit ironic because it's my constitution. So
Well,
it feels like there's something that I'm not seeing about myself. Like I don't experience myself as powerful or wanting power over people. I mean, I've experienced powerlessness, but I kind of equate that to feeling like a victim. So I wonder if you can elaborate on that and kind of help me see it.
well, have you ever gone swimming in the ocean in a reasonable amount of surf? So I'm not talking about like a waveless day where the ocean is like a clear lake. I'm talking about gone swimming with, in powerful 3 foot, 4 foot waves, like body surfing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So what happens after a while?
you get exhausted.
And what happens when
You
you notice? How do you notice you're getting exhausted?
Because I guess the waves feel overpowering.
Well, you start to get sucked out to sea, and you have a harder time dealing with the force of the tide. And you start to realize, boy, I'm getting tired. I better go in.
Mm-hmm.
So the water's just wearing things down. You know the Grand Canyon?
Yeah.
Well, that didn't start as a deep hole in the ground. That started as a little stream. And 50 million years or 100 or 200 million years or something went by.
Okay. So
it renders you powerless.
I'm trying to see it in my experience of myself.
Well, you would have to look at the degree to which you're afraid of your own power and therefore manage it because you're terrified of it. And you would have to look at the degree to which this whole I'm a meek little girl kind of thing, and I'd stay quiet and let others speak and sit back. You'd have to look at the degree to which all of that comes from actual fear of stepping into your full power and what the consequences would be.
Okay. I mean, that evoked something in me, so I guess that's a strong place to start looking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, good. Don't let your grandma push you around when you meditate.
Allowed into the room.
Otherwise, you'll get angry, and you'll never forgive her.
She's the metal.
Okay.
Thanks, Lauren.
Hi, Julia.
Hey, I tried to type this up in the group chat the other day, but when I was listening to the video, I thought, oh my gosh, triple heater, telling someone your life story on the bus was the example. And I was like, oh, I've always done that. I did that, when I was really young. And I think I learned somewhere along the way, like an ability to have a little bit of discernment, to be, for example, a better listener and have some restraint. And then you were talking about the earth element. And right now, last week, we were going up because my father had been hospitalized, and he is Buddhist since 1990s, and he was lost his ability to walk and stand and was needing 3 people to care for him. So he's hospitalized, but he's very, very generous. And part of that unconditional loving and giving is part of his, Buddhist approach to life and to get happiness. So here he was in this predicament where he needed care, but he was really needy, just how you were pointing out in the earth. But we went up on our planned visit for spring break, and I was able to tell him we were there for him and we were with him, and the Bodhisattva vow.
Mhm.
And he was delighted to have us. And we took him from the hospital to the hospice. And then he happily, peacefully, suddenly passed 12 hours later. So I feel fulfilled and grateful and glad and complete. But I see in myself this personality change, or that I felt like I was a completely different person, because 6 years ago when my mother passed, it happened to me. I suffered compound grief. I really was devastated by her loss.
Mhm.
And I couldn't work for a long time. I cried every day. I went to the office because she wasn't there. And I was able to come home and go to work and receive the flowers and the cards and the memories and be delighted. And so I think you answered it sort of here where you showed in that last comment before the one about it's a soul perspective where you're not taking it so personally, that you can, have that wholeness. But that's just my reflection.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's good, but also I think we make room for our experience. And there was nothing wrong with the experience you had with your mother. And there's nothing wrong with your experience is your experience. And this is just, it just part of the love as the context of doing this work, because this is profound medicine. I just want to emphasize, people take 5 grams of psilocybin and DMT and all of this stuff, and none of that means they're going to develop. They have incredible experience, and to really do the medicine I'm teaching, one is really going to be at one's edge and really take on the medicine to really work with what is and go deeper and deeper, never, ever, ever, ever stop, and never turn around, and never turn away, and never back off from it. And it's just the context, for the only context that's going to allow a person the strength to persevere in the face of some of the things we have to face about ourselves, right? To
Yeah.
be able to face the suffering that we've caused others out of our own ignorance. No one hasn't. No human being hasn't caused suffering to others out of their own ignorance. No human being hasn't done that. It's just, it would be impossible, because unless we work very hard, we just never know. And when we're young, we have such a partial worldview, you know? Um, it takes a long time to really develop wisdom and insight and compassion and these sort of virtues. So this love and compassion exercises itself through the medicine, through the work of being able to just really honor what our actual experience is and make room for it and allow it to be. And on the other hand, not taking things personally allows us not to consciously or unconsciously become victims and just become mired in it. Our
Yeah.
experience is what it is, and I can learn from it, and I have to make room and hold it in love. But my experience is always my experience. It is never me. My experience is never me. I am the consciousness that can see that experience that in its gross and subtle and very subtle dimensions, but I am never the experience itself.
But it was just looking back, you can kind of see growth, the development, the responsibility, the
Right.
gaining in.
And when we practice in a developmental context, we're always going to be able to look at our response to something and see how we could have done better.
Yeah.
An adult can always look at their experience and see how they could have handled it better. I have that experience constantly, day in and day out, realizing, I could have said this, I could have said that, I could have done this, I could have done that. This would have been a better, more parsimonious or compassionate or some other way to handle it. Right?
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, Don, hi.
Hello there.
Good to
So
see you.
I really just got a lot out of what you said earlier about the difference between looking at the many as opposed to looking from the many to the one.
Yes.
And what comes up for me is that I've always thought I was metal, and then I took this last class with Tracy, and it became brutally clear I was fire. And
Brutally clear?
brutally clear. I was deluding myself because I have a certain rigidity to my thinking, and I clung on to being right, that was about being metal.
Well, look, you're all of them.
Yeah. And anyway, the thing that I get out of what you were saying earlier is I have this habit of my behavior in the past was to be disassociated, if you will, from things that I didn't want to deal with. And I'm realizing it just goes back to the fundamental thing that I want to connect, which is all about the heart fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that as a way of not owning my fear of connecting. And I really appreciate that today. So that was awesome.
Well, fire can warm the rigid metal across the cycle so that the metal flows like mercury. It gives birth to, right? So the thing with metal is it condenses and hardens and gets cold with pride and then feels very separate and cut off and then can be very cynical. And opening the heart can provide a warmth to let the metal start just flowing. It's so that metal can take any shape like water, like mercury, and just become like flexible consciousness. So we want to bring the fire, the warmth and love of the heart and the heart protector to the lungs and to the colon so that things can just flow and not be hard, which means letting go of rigid concepts and ways we think about things.
Yeah. And I'm finding I'd say when we were talking in previous classes about you having a trailing edge and a leading edge on
Yes.
the chakras, I think I'm still learning it's okay to express myself, which would be my leading edge on the throat. And that's where I get a little afraid of connecting more. So
Everybody's so just looking at the impersonal nature of things. When you say sometimes you dissociate from things you don't want to engage with, there's no one on this call who can't relate to that. Everybody does it. And, when you say you want to connect more, it's interesting because, that's beautiful. And you're framing it from the position in a way of there being a problem and something you need to do.
yeah.
But you're like the only person who's talked to me in every class. Like every session we have, you connect. And every time you've connected, it's been better than the last time. So what's important is you can look from the relative point of view at the relative, you make a problem and you say, boy, I'm not connected and I really have to connect more. Or you can look and you can say, geez, I'm taking this class with 145 people and I'm one person who in every single class has asked a question. And so I would actually say that like you're actually doing very well. And maybe, so for most people, the problem is more about how they think about things than what's actually going on. And so maybe if you just relax with that good humor of yours and just put your attention on all the connections you actually do have and start experiencing gratitude for all the connections you do have and all the ways you are connected. And of course, still look to connect more and connect more sincerely and more deeply. But you haven't asked me any abstract, every time you talk to me, it's about something sincere. You're sincere about something real. It's always quality connection.
Thank you.
So people, Don, can get lost and hypnotized in the clouds of feeling states in a way that obscures them from recognizing that even on the cloudiest day, the sun is always shining with equal intensity.
So that would be a pathogen in, where would that show up?
Well, probably in gross and subtle ways, that would be revealed if I were to do like an hour and a half or 2 hour intake and pulse diagnosis and all that kind of thing. But it's apparent to me that there's a distinction between how you think about yourself and who you actually are. Who you actually are is someone who engages consistently and sincerely from their heart. So the issue would be you letting that in and dropping this idea that there's a problem and that you don't.
Right. Thanks.
I could tell by the way Tracy talked to you at the beginning of class that she's fond of you.
Yeah, it's mutual.
Yeah, so there you go. You got 2 friends here at least.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Noemi, hi. There you go.
Hey, Lenny.
Hi.
Sorry.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. My question is around the substitute gratifications that you talked about. First of all, thank you for the way that you explained it in relation to all the different elements, and it just gave a different perspective on how those things fill
Yes.
can or people use them to fill. But I'm curious, just in your experience, because I understand that concept as far as it filling a void.
Yes.
Um, does a void come from people's experiences as far as like partly interjected content that they learn or behaviors that they learn
Partly.
from parents or culture?
Well, sure. So the main influence in that regard, Noemi, in the time we live in is materialism,
Mhm.
right? So culture teaches us, you'll be fulfilled as a woman if you find a guy and have kids, and your proportions are like this, and teaches men you'll be fulfilled as a man if you do this, that, and the other thing. And it teaches us, you'll be fulfilled if you have this amount of money in your bank, or you can buy this kind of car, or you can retire at this age, right? So that would be materialism is just the fundamental belief that wholeness is to be found in the world and is of the world. And that, of course, leaves, the Talking Heads tune, "Oh my God, this is not my house. These are not my kids. This is not my wife. What have I done?"
Mhm.
Is getting to that moment when we realize I have everything I ever worked for. Death of a salesman. I paid off the mortgage. I have everything I ever worked for, and I'm empty. So the ego always puts wholeness out in the future. And I definitely remember when I was a kid, I was about 4 years old, thinking if I only had that little Gumby doll they're advertising on TV, I'd be happy. And then I remember thinking when I was 13, if I had a girlfriend, I'd be happy. And then I remember thinking when I was 14, if she has sex with me, I'll be happy. Then I remember thinking if I could only get a Gibson guitar, I'd be happy. And if I just get into college, I'd be happy. And then I remember thinking if I could just get out of college, I'd be happy. And then I thought if I could just get a wife, I'd be happy. And then I thought if I could just get divorced, I'd be happy. And then I thought if I only had this much money in the bank, I'd be happy. If I were only seeing this many patients a week. And you realize the ego is always putting wholeness. This is materialism. When I have this, when I have that at some point in the future, but it's never right now. It's never right now. And the fundamental teaching, Dharmic teaching of an absolute medicine. I actually own absolutemedicine.com, but I've never done anything with it. The fundamental teaching of an absolute medicine is, and this is Ramana Maharshi's medicine, with your mind and your body and your life and your thoughts and your feelings and sensations and your memories exactly as they are right now. Nothing is in the way and there's no excuses. And every part of you that says, but, is ego. Ego is the momentum to never be whole in the moment, but always in an imagined future.
Mm.
And that's fundamentally, the illness of materialism. Because that which makes us whole is timeless and formless and is never touched or compromised by anything that happens out here. And so what I endeavor to do with my students is to inspire them to drop it and wake up to that dimension of the self now. And stop putting time in the picture. Ego is the habit of needing more time. But you don't understand. That's well and good for you, Lonnie Jarrett. And it's well and good for the other 144 people on this call. But you don't know, my precious. You don't know what happened to me. You don't know my wound. My wound. It's mine. And you're going to pry it from my cold, dead hands. I'm never letting go. Make sure I always have something to work on.
Yeah, I understand that perspective for sure. Um, and I guess the other question I have in relation to this too is when you find that, like for example, like you mentioned metal, like an instant gratification could be smoking, right?
Mhm.
Do you find that that is very particular to the constitution of the person, like what type of reflex? Because and then I'm thinking about like, okay, well, that goes back to this first stage of development where we're a lot of these substitute gratifications have to do with some sort of oral fixation,
Well,
right?
the earliest ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so I mean, there are cultural substitute gratifications, and then there are um, more internal constitutional ones. So culturally, I mean, you know, everyone wants to look good in their Lululemon spandex, and everybody wants a nice car. And there are certain things that culture promises and teaches us will make us happy. And those are substitute gratifications.
Okay.
But then each element tends to have its own. So for water, wants power more than it wants to be free. Wood wants to be right more than it wants to be free. Fire wants connection more than it wants to be free. Earth wants to take care of or be taken care of more than it wants to be free. Metal wants to be valued or possess something of value more than it wants to be free. You see, so these are sort of elemental.
Yes, I do. I
So
see the connection.
wood protects itself by being belligerent about being right, or by just giving up its position and caving immediately so it doesn't have to stand for anything. Because when I stood for something when I was little, my father hit me. Or when I stood for something when I was little, I lost my parents, or my parents got divorced, or this or that, right? So it's if I stand for something, if I stand with strength, the Zhengshi, if I stand upright for something, I'm going to be wounded. Or so I manage things by always being wishy-washy and too flexible, or I belligerently push my agenda um, because I have shut off the part of myself that's compassionate, because wood is very much about compassion.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank, thank you,
thank,
Lonnie.
thank you. Hi, Colin.
Hey, Lonnie.
Yes, sir. You talk to me every class too.
I'm a chatty dude.
No, it's good. Yeah.
Um, I've been thinking about this idea of process and the impersonal nature of the self,
Yeah.
which, in Buddhist terms, it's not a new idea, but
Yeah.
one of the threads throughout the whole Green Book is answering the question, who am I? What am I doing about, or who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing about it?
Yeah.
And if I am contemplating the impersonal nature of the self and the reality that I don't have a fixed identity independent from the 10,000 things,
Hmm.
um, I find that it's very difficult to answer the question, who am I? Why am I here? And what am I doing about it? And also, from an existentialist perspective, if you say man is the sum of his actions, um, it just seems to me that consciousness is too vast and infinite, and the net is too big for us to be wandering around without any sense of a fixed self. And
Of course, that's true.
yeah, I'm
I
just
mean,
wondering.
you got to stop at red lights.
Yeah. How does one find the balance between the taking on a role consciously and saying I'm choosing this role and these principles are going to guide my actions
Mhm.
versus trying to rest in this idea to study the self is to forget the self kind of how do we work with these simultaneously?
Well, when you say if I don't take things personally, it's hard to answer the question of who am I? Well, the answer to the question of who am I is I am emptiness and luminosity. I am fire incarnate in form for the sake of catalyzing the emergence of the true, the good, and the beautiful, and contributing, engaging in life in a way that ends the suffering of all those I engage with, that contributes to the end of suffering and the awakening of all I engage with. And that is not a personal thing. That is what anyone who contemplates will discover who and what they are. So I think you're perhaps conflating here. So when I say to discover who I am, the who I am is the motive force of creativity in the universe. And then we contemplate, well, what is the nature of that? Well, it is infinite and it is love and it is caring. And then I can ask, why am I here? Well, I am here to catalyze the emergence of wholeness, love, and light in everything and everyone I engage with. Well, how should I live? And then the how shall I live is answered by, given my fundamental recognition of who and what I am and why I'm here, what are my gifts? What are my capacities? People often, in my career when I was seeing, 60 people every week for the, 38 years or so, people are often confronted with what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? I might like to do this. I might like to do that. And I always pushed people to consider what is the way, given your capacities and your talents, in which you can best serve. So rather than what would make me happy, how could I be of most benefit to the greatest number of beings? And to turn it around and to look at the question in that way. The answer to your question is in the Heart Sutra, which is form is formlessness and formlessness is form, and there's only one thing happening. And in this teaching anyway, we're not looking for an enlightenment beyond the world. We're looking for an enlightenment in the world, which embraces and denies no fundamental part of the human experience. I mean, so, Nourishing Destiny kind of sums up I was compelled to write that. I mean, the books I've written, the articles I've written, they're not fabrications of my mind. I received direct orders. and carry out the work. The 100,000 hours it took to write those 3 books, I would have been probably personally happier playing guitar and going for walks in the woods. You see, but there was something to do. And God's giving me a little bit of a vacation now for a little while. You never know when I'm going to wake up again 4 a.m. and say, oh, fuck. That's what happened with the last 2. I told my wife after the first one I was never going to write another book. And I literally sat up in bed, literally at like 3:30 in the morning, and the entire Red Book presented itself in its entirety. It only took 5 years to write that. And I wrote the whole thing in my clinic in between patients, and it was simple. I practically didn't have to think. The only chapter I had to think about in that book was the last chapter. The rest of the book wrote itself.
Mm.
So yeah, so the thing is we want to look at what are my capacities? What are my gifts? And it doesn't have to be like, probably because I'm an egomaniac, I really wanted to set out and create something in Chinese medicine, which will give you an idea of just how egomaniacal I am, on a par with like Electric Ladyland and Sergeant Pepper and Bruce Lee. Like I really wanted to, like these were my heroes growing up, and I wanted to do something in Chinese medicine like of that magnitude. But I mean, being kind is a good thing. I mean, it can be simple. It doesn't have to be like taking on a project like that. The point is that no engagement we ever have with anyone should be insignificant. So there's a little bit in the way you asked me the question of you using the philosophy around it as a way of not putting your stake in the ground. Because you can see these complex positions and you can pose these dualities. And there's a way one can use philosophy to avoid really putting one's stake in the ground, because there's actually no conflict at all between recognizing oneself as timeless and formless, dimensionless and eternal, the ground of being and the fire exploding within it, and leading an engaged life that has meaning and value, not just to oneself, but to the whole. These two are not in conflict whatsoever, which is essentially Ramana's message. Does that sound okay? Okay. Hi, Marty.
Hi, Lonnie.
Nice to see you.
ni- Likewise. I'm finally speaking up a little bit. I've been really doing some deep diving and trying to really figure out how to put my stake in the ground. And as I'm doing that, I feel like I've kind of done that, but moving forward, I feel so stuck, and I just keep getting kind of overwhelmed with the looking back at how much I've held back in my life. And all the moments that weren't because I couldn't. And, all the things that
Say
I've
the
done,
last sentence again.
all the moments that weren't because I couldn't,
Couldn't what?
be there, present, show up, I think.
Where were you?
That's a good question. I think I was on Zog, Lonnie.
No, but I mean,
But I'm here.
So if you change the word couldn't to didn't,
Yeah. Well, that does give me a little, couldn't is a little powerless. Or is it a little bit victimy, isn't it? Is that what you're saying?
yeah. Couldn't means you had no choice.
Yeah.
And
All right.
and put from the position of the part of you that has put its stake in the ground, part of that stake is the recognition of the absolute nature of choice. Because putting the stake in the ground means that we give up the right to ever be victims of our own ignorance again and to victimize others, because now we know.
Yes. So what do you do with that, though? I mean, you give up your right to and also just realizing perhaps the things that I've chosen to do, causing suffering to other people. What do I do with that?
Do you have to
Just
say
kind of really,
do you have to say you're sorry to anyone?
might not be a bad idea. That probably would,
It'd be a simple place to start.
yeah.
So, okay, so are you a Chinese medicine practitioner?
Hmm.
How long have you practiced?
Yes.
How long have you practiced?
13 years.
Do you help people?
Yes, I think I really do help people.
Do you show up for them?
Yeah,
Do you
every
care?
day.
Do you care?
Yeah,
Well,
of course.
how deeply do you care?
I think I care a lot.
Well, how much? Is there a
Mm,
limit to your care?
that's an interesting thought. I don't really think so. I think I just keep caring, loving and caring and wanting to help.
Okay, so if you put your attention on that part of yourself, which is that, what's your experience? Just now, put your attention on it. The part of yourself that
Hmm.
cares infinitely. What's your
Yeah.
experience of that?
Oh, that's really free from all the stuff that I just mentioned a minute ago.
Thank you. Yes. So so you were talking about yourself, the relative wounded dimension of yourself, from the perspective of the relative wounded dimension of yourself. And it all
Yeah.
seems very real, and then you're mired in a swamp. But if you shift your attention to the part of yourself which is just love and infinite care, all that other stuff is revealed instantly to be bullshit.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
so putting our stake in the ground means I've discovered who I really am and I've made a choice and I can't pretend I don't know anymore. And then there are going to be persistence of structures from that other self, which has been revealed to be small, puny, relatively insignificant, although not totally without significance. And we're going to be able to look at that and hold it in the love and the infinite care of this self who we have discovered is really who and what we are. And that's going to change everything because now we know and we're never not going to know again.
Right.
So that is
Thank
the
you.
power that is the power of looking at the relative dimension of the self through the eyes of the absolute dimensions of the self. And the nature of the absolute dimension is there's infinite space, infinite ease, and overwhelming love and care. So much care that it breaks our heart.
Yeah.
And then we forgive ourselves for our past ignorance. We make amends. This is basic stuff. If there's someone we have to say, I'm sorry to, we say it.
Yeah.
So we can be free and they can be free. And we let go of the pride.
Right.
And then
Thank you.
we lighten up like Don.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've felt so stuck. Really been feeling stuck. So thank you.
There is no stuck. You're on a ball spinning through space like 200,000 miles an hour in the middle of an explosion that we're told has been going for 14 billion years. Stuck is just a question of where people put their attention.
Yeah.
And there are habitual structures in us that, like 2-year-olds throwing temper tantrums, demand we keep our attention on them. And there's no necessity to have to do that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you, Marty. Okay, Blake, hi.
Hey, Lana, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Are you familiar with the concept of the dark triad or the dark tetrad, as it's sometimes called?
The
Personality.
dark what?
Triad or tetrad. It like describes personality types that are, I guess, psychopathic in nature. I think it's like narcissism, sadism, Machiavellianism.
Well, I'm familiar with all those terms,
I was
but
wondering.
but I haven't heard them referred to as triads, but sadism, anal sadism, and yeah, psychopaths and narcissism and whatnot. I'm familiar with those syndromes.
Have you done any like exploration into how those fit, and if they do fit into the 5 element theory and or like the chakral theory?
Well, a person could be a narcissist and be any constitution, but it seems that the ones that are most prone to narcissism are fire and earth.
Fire and earth. How come?
Well, fire is the heart, which is the center of the universe and existence, the emperor. And then earth just gets concerned with all its own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, sucked into its own head with thought. And its own needs become paramount because it's injured wounded at a very, very early stage, often relative to, breastfeeding and nutrition and oral fixations very, very early in life.
In your own practice, have you run into personality types like that? And if so, like how do you?
Yeah, so my office, you know the James Taylor song Fire and Rain?
Yeah.
And he sings "The road was all cloudy from Stockbridge to Boston."
Mm-hmm.
Well, my office was in Stockbridge for 36 years, across the street from the Austin Riggs Center, which is the largest psychiatric live-in institution in North America. Now it costs about $50,000 a month to go there, and James had been there as a patient when he was young, and he still lives locally. He had a freak out on LSD, and he wrote that whole album, Living in Stockbridge, and that whole institution is literally the whole side of the street. Almost everything on the other side of the street from my office are buildings associated with that institution. So I actually over the 36 years I was in practice there, regularly had patients with real psychiatric diagnoses. And many of these people were like heavy duty OCD, like come in every time they'd come in, they'd line the seat they sat in with the New York Times, because God knows the New York Times is going to be cleaner to sit on than the chair in my office. And, we can laugh, but they were suffering terribly. They would sit there and they would have a plant mister and spray themselves in the face the whole time they were talking to me. And I would also have real OCD and people who were real narcissists, like narcissism is so pervasive that when they put out the last diagnostic and statistical manual, there was a year-long fight among the psychiatrists making it, because many of them wanted to eliminate the diagnosis of narcissism because it's so pervasive in culture. But the people, so we all have in the postmodern age, right? Which really came in the 1950s, 60s, and exploded in the 70s, right? This narcissism, because our parents and really their parents defeated the Nazis, and they decided my children are never, ever, ever going to have to go through this. And they raised us, this is your life, honey. You can be whatever you want. You can do whatever you can do. And they protected us, and understandably, really worked to protect us. So there's and make the self, in the 70s, all these magazines came out with names like Self and Us, right? So narcissism is pervasive in culture, but the people that I saw were like levels and levels and levels of narcissism beyond that. The most glaring example of a narcissist we have in culture today is Donald Trump. The man is a deeply pathological, malignant narcissist who is incapable of empathy and is at a purely transactional stage of development and at an anal sadistic stage of development. What he likes is keeping everybody upset and off balance all the time. And that's what he's doing now, is it's just sadistic. He's not actually coming out with policies trying to reasonably change culture. He's just throwing throws crap against the wall, see who gets upset, sees what sticks, sees what doesn't, and is constantly, even with his own staff, trying to unseat, unnerve, and upset everybody. And so that is he was obviously deeply and profoundly wounded at the first and second stage of development, and has to be obsessed with power, and his earth metal constitution, and the earth is that narcissism, and the metal is the pride, and the gold toilets and gold pianos and everything being gold, which is just an extra version of this dysbiosis in his own intestines. So anyway, yes, I have dealt with people that's that pathological, and Chinese medicine helped many of them feel somewhat better, but these were people who are never, ever going to be what we would consider healthy in their lifetime. People who were narcissists, but on the more not to the extreme that Trump is and that some of these patients have described, but they were narcissistic to a degree, but you could contact their human-heartedness, and they were able to change. And I did work with at least one woman who I wrote about in the red book, Under Possession. I did a case study on her, and she had run away from home at 15, lived in the streets of the Bronx, been gang raped, horrible, horrible things. And she was diagnosed schizophrenic and depressive and on Thorazine and lithium when I first got her. And after 5 years, she got off all those things. And that was in the mid-90s, never got on it, never had to take those drugs again. But she's the only one. Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I have one quick question,
Sure.
maybe,
Yeah.
if it's not inappropriate. In the fire chapter, you'd written about Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, and how it was what he was describing was contextual with his particular culture at the time, which wasn't 10 billion and growing. Whereas today, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but like his ideas might be a little, maybe still relevant, but not as relevant as they were back when the book was originally written. Do you remember?
Well, it's just not a whole worldview anymore. It's a partial worldview.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think I give the example that culture is changing so quickly. Look, Taoism is all about returning. It's about going back. And they elevated and worshiped a golden era in the past and wanted to return to be like that. And they wanted to go back to be like children and live in nature without Confucian culture and without patriarchy, and really live I mean, they were like ultimately like libertarians, I guess. And even not just in the present era, but the Buddhists realized, that in the ox herding pictures, that the point is that the ox herder who goes out and leaves the marketplace and goes on a journey and gets enlightened, the 10th picture is him returning back to the marketplace, and which Jesus would say, like, being in the world, but not of the world. Right? So, I don't think Lao Tzu ever bought an abacus and then said to his wife 3 weeks later, Jesus Christ, they've just come out with a new one and it's got pearl inlay and a whole other row of beads. And it's like, now you wait all year, you buy an iPhone, and literally 72 hours after the new iPhone comes out, you'll start seeing articles on the internet about what the next iPhone, like I got the iPhone 16 and 3 days later they were talking about what the iPhone 17 is going to have. So everything's already obsolete. Everything's moving so quickly. And it didn't do that look, nothing really ostensibly changed for humanity for for millions of years. And now things are obviously like changing mind-blowingly quickly.
The teachings, though, when you talk about returning and the one seeing the many, is that not indicative of some of the Tao?
The fundamental view of the Tao Te Ching is a timeless realization of emptiness. And that will always be relevant. It just doesn't include anything about evolution.
Right.
And so now we have something else we've woken up to, which is the creative impulse, the evolutionary impulse, pushing its way into form and us being vehicles for the expression of that. So the Taoist ideal was to leave culture, literally leave culture, and go to the mountains and live in a cave and get enlightened and sit by a stream the rest of your life and chop wood and carry water and lead a simple life. And that is relevant metaphorically as an expression of awakening to the timeless dimension of ourselves, so we can proceed through our days and the complexity of life from the position of ease and no problem, and be rooted in a deep connection to emptiness and spaciousness and ease within inside of ourselves. But if everyone just leaves culture and goes to the woods, first of all, we're going to run into a lot of people out in the woods. And secondly, we have a lot we have to clean up, and we need new medical, political, social, economic, military, and educational systems if humanity is to survive. So that's
what would you say, emptiness?
Huh?
I was the one. Is emptiness and consciousness, are they on opposite ends of a spectrum?
No, they're not opposite. They're the relationship between consciousness and the unconscious. Emptiness is the womb, the fertile incubator. The emptiness doesn't mean nothing. It means pure potential. And
Okay.
Consciousness is the fire that activates that potential and catalyzes the emergence of the true, the good, the beautiful.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Did we do it? Anyone else have a question? Okay. So the next class module is up. And of course, I will post this Q&A tomorrow. The next class module is treatment. And then the one after that is the nature of the therapeutic relationship. And the one after that is just, I haven't made that video yet. I'll wait till we do the next two classes and then find something to talk about to try to bring it together. And we'll the third one will just be really whatever I come up with, and then questions around engagement. And I'm going to want to talk to people and hear how everybody's experience has been through the class. I'm considering putting another multi-session class together beginning in the fall, where the whole class, I'd like anyone who cares, write me and tell me what you'd like me to teach. Some people think I should do a multi-session class on Nourishing Destiny for the 25th anniversary of it. But I feel like people basically got that book. And since so much of that book is the 5 elements anyway, and I've done an extended 5-element course and I'm doing a 5-element course, I'm thinking of giving a class where we take the dimensions of the self, which was one episode of this class. See, in this class, I've taken a certain dimension of what I teach in my 2-year course and blown it up into a 10-month course as its own thing. And I'm thinking of taking the first class and blowing it up. So I do a 2-hour lecture on ego, a 2-hour lecture on superego, a 2-hour lecture on conscience and soul, a 2-hour lecture on each of the dimensions of the self with readings in between each time. So people could spend a long time going into each dimension to make sure those dimensions aren't abstract. And this is really based on a fundamental principle of this teaching, which is that we know the patient through knowing ourselves, that we're all fundamentally having the same human experience. That's the impersonal nature of it. And, you can say at first blush, well, that's ridiculous. I had my grandmother and I had this experience and I had that experience, and my parents were German and your parents were Irish and this and that. And everyone's a unique individual. And but there are only 7 emotions and there are only a few kinds of sensations human beings feel. And there aren't that many unique thoughts anybody has. And nobody on this call has ever had an emotion that nobody else on the call didn't have. And the reason this teaching works and is so poignant is because really the times, the dates, the places change, but the mechanisms are all the same in all of us. They're all fundamentally the same in all of us. That's why they're knowable. And so I just started to really work with the idea of putting this course together. I'm going to offer a 1-session course, and we'll see how it goes as a follow-up to this course, where Tracy or Sarah J will bring a patient and I will interview them online in front of everybody. And Tracy will have taken their pulses, and I'll do like the exact same intake I would do if they came to my clinic, and we'll look at their tongue. And then I will present the person and everything that happened in the context of everything I've taught you. So we'll look where all the contradictions and ironies were, and the repressions and the projections. And this is something I do in my clinical integration class, is the first 5 classes of theory. And then so the first 10 days of theory and the next 14 days are me seeing 2 patients a day and going into hours and hours of explanation about what happened there. So Dave, you had a question?
Yeah, and my attention drifted in the last 30 seconds. I don't know if you just mentioned it, but the clinical integration class, are you offering that again next year?
No, I was thinking the one I'm doing now is the last one I'll ever do, but my conscience tells me that maybe in what I'm going to put this class together I talked about, I think,
Hmm.
next fall. And then the following fall offer the shadow work class again. And then the following fall, if I'm still alive and culture still exists, and we still have the internet and there's still an economy left, I will probably offer that class one last time.
Okay, thank
So
you.
we're looking for at something like fall of 28.
Got it. Thank
I'll
you.
be old then. But I'm wood, I plan, So
Yeah.
I
Well,
hope
I'll have to just learn from Rachel Krieger what she's been learning from you.
I look in the future. Good. Well,
Yeah.
Rachel's learning a lot and works very hard.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, my friends. Talk soon. Lots of love. Thank you. Good night, Grandma.
Good night, all.
My grandmother always told me to sit in the corner and not make a sound. Kind of ironic.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Hey, Margot.
Thank you. Hi, Lonnie.
Hey,
How's it going?
never better. Why don't you hang out for a minute and we'll
Chit
talk.
chat. Okay.
Hey, everyone, you can all sign off.
Bye, Lonnie. Thank you.
Where's Molly? Oh, Molly's gone already. Good night, Joanna. Good night, Natasha. Good night, Robin, Megan.
Maybe they're eating dinner.
Yeah, I always wonder about this. Anyway, I'm going to just
Wait a
remove
second. I know. Oh, you can remove them. That's cool.